Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Priest Forever, the Vocations Office of the Diocese of Bridgeport's podcast. We are excited to welcome you back. We hope that you are doing well. We hope that your Lent has been a very blessed and graced time for you. Today, we are very happy to welcome our next guest, Father Fr Piccinino, who currently serves as the pastor at St. Mary's Church in Bethel. Welcome, Father Corey. We're so grateful to have you here with us
Thank you, Father
today.
Ford. It's good to be with you.
Excellent. Great. So why don't we begin as kind of we have become accustomed to, which is just tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little bit about where you're from. Who is Father Corey Piccinino?
Well, I was born in 1960 in Bridgeport. I'm a Bridgeport fella all my life. My mother and father lived on the east side of Bridgeport. My mom, Frances, has passed about 6 years ago. My dad, who's 97, still lives home alone, Dominic. Still drives and is probably in better shape than most of us. Um, I have an older sister, Donna, who is a widow. She has two daughters, and they each have two children. And so it's just the two of us in our family. We grew up on the east side of Bridgeport on Knowlton Street, and we lived underneath my grandfather Vito, who was my dad's dad, and had a lot of influence on me when I was growing up. Was a real solid, good man. And we belonged to St. John Nepomucene Church, which was on the east side of Bridgeport. It's interesting that the big altar from that church is now moved to St. Charles, so I was glad to see it still used.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a Slovak ethnic parish, and even though I'm half Slovak and half Italian, we went to that church, and kind of a lot of our social life was involved in that as well. I went to St. John Nepomucene School for the first 6 years of education, and that school closed. So I went to St. John the Baptist School, which was really right down the street from St. John Nepomucene, and it was a Byzantine Catholic school. So I was there for 2 years, and then they closed, and now I think it's called Roberto Clemente School. And then I went over to the other side of Bridgeport to Holy Rosary, and that's where I graduated from 8th grade. Then I went to Notre Dame High School in Fairfield. And after that, Sacred Heart University for college. And then I ended up at St. John's Seminary in Brighton, Massachusetts, where I did my seminary days. And in those days, seminarians were sent to St. John's, to Rome, and to another number of other places in the state of not just Connecticut, but around the country. I had a great childhood, nothing too spectacular. I had a dog, a beagle named Buddy, on one of the busiest streets of Bridgeport. We always had to keep running after him all the time. He loved to run down the busy street, never was hurt, thank God. And I played Little League baseball, not well. I'm not very coordinated. Even when I went for my driver's license, thank God it snowed that day, so I didn't have to parallel park. So God was looking out for me. I was an altar boy, and then a member of the choir and a lector. And like I said, I had a lot of good experiences at church. I had a really great pastor, Father Al Tomasco, who has since passed, and I didn't really have a relationship with him, but it was a good, I don't know, I admired him greatly. And I mean, it's not like he came to our house or anything like that, but he was always very kind, and he was very well known in the area of the east side of Bridgeport, and people had a lot of respect for him, and so did I. So I always thought he was a great influence on me.
Yeah, and I think that's really important that we don't often realize, right? As priests, we think that a lot of times it's the things that we do, right, that can have an influence on people, but we don't often realize sometimes just who we are, the impact that can have on people, on how just by our presence, just by being priests, even people that we may not necessarily realize that we're having an impact on, it can have a significant one, as clearly it did for you.
A lot of people, though, they say that I missed my vocation, and I think one of the reasons why they do that is um, I'm a kind of a funny guy, make a lot of jokes, and um, so I think that what they mean is I would have made a good comedian, but I don't know if they don't think I'd make a good priest, but it all sort of worked out in the end. I think
That's right.
you can
That's
bring a
right.
lot of comfort to people with humor. So anyway, but go ahead.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
No, no, you're fine. It just, one of the things that you really started off with, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about, is it's so obvious how important family is
Hmm.
to you. Because the very first things you started talking about were your parents and your sister and your nieces and your father and all those things and your grandfather. So I just would just welcome maybe a little bit more, talking about the impact that your family has had on you, because I think that's something that is really, really important for us to understand, especially if we're going to think about our faith, really as a community and as a family, just about the importance of family to you.
Well, it's kind of interesting that I look back and um, my father was a firefighter, and in those days in the Bridgeport Fire Department, they had 3 days on, 3 days off, and 3 nights. And my parents insisted that when my father was working nights, that we would still have supper together. It was dinner together, and that was really important.
Hmm.
So for 3 days out of 9, we would have dinner at 4 o'clock, which seems kind of unusual for a lot of people. They eat at 5, 6, 7 o'clock, but because
Yeah.
it was family time, and even though he was going to work, we would have dinner together all the time. I didn't come from a family that was too demonstrative in any way with emotions, or um, it wasn't. We had a loving family without saying it, and
Hmm.
it's also that we weren't. How can I say this? We weren't dramatically religious. I mean, we went to mass every day, every week. We did the holy day masses. Like I said, I went to Catholic school, and you know, but we weren't saints by any means. Okay, and I personally never struggled with the faith. I always believed, and I always, you know, I never wavered from it. In other words, but my grandfather, for example, from Italy, he didn't go to church except for funerals and weddings and stuff. But he was a deeply religious man. He prayed on his own,
Hmm.
and so I guess what I'm saying is you can come from any background, and still have a spiritual sense in your family of the church, and go from there. So right now, I'm very happy to say that I have two nieces, and as I said before, they have children. Um, One niece has Gianna, who is a just received her driver's license, so we're very proud of her, and Michael, who is a big Mets fan. And then we have my other niece, Kara, who has Ava, who is a bundle of energy, and Sophia, who is everybody's sweetheart. So I spend a lot of time um, kind of spoiling them. Since I don't have
Sure.
kids of my
Yeah.
own in that sense, I spoil them. I spoiled my nieces, but now they take a back
Yeah.
seat to the grandnieces and nephew.
Sure, sure. It's funny. That's actually something that I'm beginning to experience myself. I have now my first
Hmm.
niece, Adeline, who just celebrated her first birthday just a few days ago, and so was actually unfortunate. They live in
Ah,
Arizona, so but made the trek out there because her first birthday was definitely not something that I was
sure.
going to miss. But it's family is so so critically important, and I think you bring up something else that's really, really important for us to remember and to realize that sometimes vocation stories and sometimes even our relationship with Jesus and our relationship with the church is not something
Hmm.
dramatic. It's not always something that is this kind of mountaintop experience or whatever, and it doesn't need to be, right? That our relationship with God, our relationship with our faith is something that can happen very naturally, very organically, and very simply. And that doesn't mean that it's any less strong. It doesn't mean that it's any less good or any less beautiful than someone who has one of those kind of lightning
Hmm.
strike moments, so to speak.
True. Yeah, when we had talked about me coming on the program here, I had told you that I don't really have a very exciting story to tell about my vocation. It's something that I felt as long as I can remember that I wanted to be a priest. And
Yeah,
as I said, we didn't come from an overly religious family. Uh, it was something that I felt, and there was no plan B, for example. I didn't
mm,
want to. I never thought about becoming anything else, a lawyer or whatever. It just wasn't there, and I never had the girl I left at the altar. Um,
mhm,
it was just something that I thought I wanted to be for my entire life, and as a result, I kind of focused everything on that. It's not like I didn't have fun in my life. I
sure.
don't mean that, but I mean it was, and I wasn't constantly in prayer, but I did the things I did, even in college, for example, so that I would be on that path to priesthood. Yeah,
Sure.
I kind of envy those people who have these big mountaintop things because it seems like people are so interested in those great stories, I got into
Yeah.
a relationship, and then I had to decide whether I was going to do this or not, or people wanted
Mm,
me to become a doctor. It was none of that. I remember when I told my
yeah.
parents, I think I was about 17 years old, and my mother said, I kind of knew this already. And she said, I
Yeah.
wasn't surprised. And the only thing we want to do is hope you're happy in what you do. So they were
Yeah.
always very supportive. And I think no matter what I wanted to do, they would be supportive.
Sure.
It's a little
Yeah.
weird. I have to
Yeah.
admit, it's a little weird being the priest of the family because you go
Yeah.
from being
A little bit.
son and brother and nephew to
Yeah.
celebrating funerals and weddings and baptisms who people say, I knew you when you were a bit of a jerk, when you were younger. And now I'm bringing Jesus to them
Sure.
in these grace-filled
Yeah.
sacraments. So it is a little strange. Good strange, but strange
Yeah.
nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, right? It's a delicate balance sometimes for us to strike. I remember, my grandfather passed away just this past September, and it was, one, it was okay. Obviously, I'm celebrating the funeral and doing those things, but there's a couple different pieces to it, right? So, for example, when it came time for the wake service, I made the decision. I did not do the wake. I celebrated the funeral the next day, but I had Father Tim Iannicone, a very close friend of the family. He came and did the wake service, and there was two reasons, right? One was I needed to just be his
Hmm.
grandson for a little bit, right? I needed to be ministered to as well, which is something I think we don't talk about or acknowledge
Right.
enough sometimes as priests, is our own need to be
Hmm.
ministered to. But also, I thought of, like, my sisters and my cousins and stuff. They also needed a moment where I was not like the center of
Hmm.
attention, right? Where I was not the one doing everything and everything. It was no, there was another priest coming in, and for that moment I was their brother and I was their cousin again, rather than being the priest in the family, so to
And
speak.
none of them want to go to confession to me, which is all very disappointing.
I can't imagine why. I cannot imagine why that would be the case. Yeah, yeah. Oh man, no, but it's again, and as we said when we were talking about your coming on the show, right? I think as easy as it is to be envious of those moments, right, of those mountaintop moments that other people have, one of the challenges I see sometimes with guys who are discerning priesthood or anything that God is trying to do in their life is that if you spend your time looking for and waiting for that moment, you're going to miss what God is actually
Hmm.
doing in your life. Right. So for you, it was just this kind of steady, constant thought throughout your life that was never really, kind of epiphany, just was there, and this constant pull. And you might have missed that if you were saying, well, I can only be called if I have this
Right.
extraordinary thing, if this extraordinary event happens. You might have missed or not given as much credence to what ultimately led you to seminary and to the priesthood
Hmm.
anyway.
That's true. Um, Either way works, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, you said you went through Catholic school, through being an altar boy, and all of those things. Talk to me a little bit about that. About I think we have a lot of people in our diocese in particular who are still big supporters of Catholic education. But we're always hearing, oh, a school's closing or this might happen or whatever. But talk to me a little bit about that, about the impact that going to Catholic school had on you, and both in terms of your faith formation, but also in terms of your discernment of priesthood.
Well, interestingly enough, going through the three Catholic grammar schools that I went to because of the closings, it was a little bit traumatic, to be honest with you. Um,
Mhm.
you know, Getting a whole new group of classmates three different times was
Yeah.
kind of different, to say the least. And then going for 2 years to the Byzantine Catholic school was, opening of a whole new rite of the church that I had never seen before. And it's funny, when I was in grammar school, so this was in the 60s, the first one, St. John of Palmyra. We didn't have, there were nuns in the school, but I didn't have any. They were SSNDs.
Mhm.
And then when I went to St. John the Baptist, they had Monsignor Dolanay, and he was the pastor there. And he became a bishop on the West Coast in the diocese there. And we had Sisters of St. Basil the Great. And
Okay.
and then when I went to Holy Rosary in Bridgeport, we had one sister there who was a Sister of Mercy, Sister Julie. And I think what Catholic education is very much, you feel at home, you feel there's a family, you feel safe. You always get a great education. And there's the interaction between uh, family and church.
Mhm.
Right now at St. Mary's School, for example, in Bethel, there's a great relationship between the church and the school, and we have a great school here. But I think the most important thing was that you always got a great education, but there was always something more. And obviously, the first thing is Jesus and the faith. But
Sure.
the teaching staff, the administration, was always God centered. There was always a
Mm.
kindness, and I have to admit, they used to let us out of school to serve funerals, and I never cried about that too much. Um,
Sure.
Getting out of
Sure.
school, yes. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think it does have a good influence on. Um, you're not afraid to talk about the Lord.
Yeah.
That's primary, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So you're getting ready to graduate from
Hmm.
Notre Dame in Fairfield, and so this pull that has been on your heart since you were young to be a priest, but you end up going to Sacred
I did.
Heart. Did the thought of going to seminary right out of high school, to like a college seminary, did that really ever come up, or did you know that you wanted to go to college kind of in the more
I'm
traditional
glad
way?
I went to college in the more traditional way. I almost wish I went away to college. It would have matured me more.
Hmm.
But there was
Sure.
there was no program in
Okay.
1978 for fellas that wanted to be a priest right out of high school. There was no program. And I did talk to Monsignor Cusack, who was the vocation directors at the time. And he said, pick a college, go to college, get some philosophy, and we'll see you. Um, and the guys now are so much luckier that there's a program, a
Mhm.
connection, and all the rest of that stuff. But no, I
Sure.
actually, I worked while I was in when I was in college. I worked at the Highway Theater in Stratford, Connecticut, and I also worked part time, which became a full time job at Reed's department store. And I sold
Okay.
shirts and ties, of which I don't use anymore, right? And I also worked in the shoe department. And right after college, I needed a year. And so I worked
Mm.
full time. I tried seminary, and I just said, after going for a couple of weeks, I just said, I'm not ready yet. And I went and worked
Mm.
full time at Reed's, which I loved working with the public, believe it or not. But I guess that's a connection with priesthood. And
Sure.
I worked a lot. And then after a year, I was ready to go to the seminary. I took a trip to Europe and came back and went to Boston for the seminary. And I'm glad I did it that way. As I said, I wish I had gone away to college because I was immature at the time and needed some independence. And I'm really glad I worked because it was an interesting experience learning how to uh, work with people that this was their livelihood. This wasn't something they were just doing on this part-time jobs, you know? So it was really important, I think, to get that experience. And um, I think it's a great experience to, um, you know, be an average, normal person too. I think it helps in your priesthood.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we have to understand, right? That where our people are coming from, and because we're coming really from the
Right,
same place, right? It's easy to forget that
right.
sometimes. But whatever our ministry is now, right? First and foremost, like the people that we serve, we're disciples. We're called to be disciples, and so when we weren't born
Right.
priests, we may have known that that's something we wanted to do from a young age, or what God was calling us to do from a young age, but we weren't always priests, and so it's good for us to have that experience. So now you're armed with that experience, and you enter seminary, and you go up to St. John's in Brighton. What was your experience like in seminary?
Well, I'm not just saying this, but I loved the seminary. I really did. I had a great time there.
Yeah,
And I think it's for a number of
good.
reasons. First of all, the people I went to the seminary with were from all over the country. And
Hmm.
because of that, I got to know and become friends with a lot of fellas in different experiences. The second thing
Hmm.
was it was a great education. We were in a consortium with the other seminaries in and around Boston, both Catholic and non Catholic. And you
Hmm.
can take a course there provided it was approved. And the third thing is I loved living in Boston. It was a great experience to live in
Yeah.
Boston for those years. And so my seminary experience, I had to study. I mean, education, I always did well in my studies,
Hmm.
but I had to work at it. It didn't necessarily come naturally. So,
Sure.
but I'm still friends with a lot of fellows from the seminary. It was like I said, a great experience, and I can't. Food wasn't always great, but that was that was about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't go to seminary for
No,
the food
you
unless you
don't.
go to Rome.
That didn't seem to
That's
harm
great.
what I look like today. So
That's fair. Yeah, ditto. Yeah, no, that's fair. That's fair. So, what year were you
I was
ordained?
ordained December 20th, 1986, 5 days before Christmas by Bishop Walter Curtis. Now, I think that could have been planned a little bit better.
Yeah.
It was ordination on the 20th. December 21st was my first Mass at St. John's. And then it was Christmas, and I hadn't done a bit of shopping, and it was a crazy couple of days. There
I
were
would
two
imagine.
others who were ordained with me, and or I was ordained with them, however you look at it, and it was one of Bishop Curtis's last classes, I think, that before he retired. I think there was
Mm,
one more after us, and
yeah.
it was a beautiful cold day. I can remember that.
Mm,
I don't remember tons of that stuff, but
mm,
it was a beautiful day, and so was the day of my first Mass.
yeah. And so where has your priesthood kind of taken you since that day? What are some of the highlights of your time serving the
Well, you know,
church?
it's another interesting thing. I grew up in Bridgeport and lived a couple of years in Stratford. And my diaconate year, or diaconate summer, I spent at St. Anne's in Black Rock. Great people there too.
Oh yeah.
But I served my entire 36 years of priesthood up in this area. I was
Wow.
assigned to St. Peter's, in
Hmm.
1986 and served there for, I think, 12 years. And I moved from there to Immaculate High School, which I served there for 12 years as first
Wow.
as a teacher and a chaplain, and then as assistant principal. And I did recruitments and all that, visiting grammar schools to try to get people to Immaculate High School. And I loved being there. It was great. They
Yeah.
had great faculty. The kids, I'm still doing weddings and baptisms from those days. People
Sure.
have become very close friends that I had there. So I was there for 12 years. And while I was there, they asked me to move residences, and I became a resident in 2002 here at St. Mary's
Hmm.
under Monsignor Ed Carl, who another wonderful, wonderful man, great priest, and was always so very, very kind to me.
Sure.
And then Monsignor got sick, and he had to retire. And in 2007, I became pastor here and left Immaculate High School, and I've been here ever since. And
Mhm.
hopefully, the next step for me after I leave here will be retirement. I don't want to start again. Uh,
That's
yeah.
that's fair. That's I think that's fair. I think that's reasonable at this point. Now, one of the things I think that whether it's been a conscious decision by you or other people, I don't entirely know. But one of the things that I think has marked in a lot of ways your time at St. Mary's is really still towards education and formation, which is you have had quite a few seminarians and newly ordained priests whose first assignment has been
Hmm.
St. Mary's. So, what has that experience been like for you as a pastor, as a priest, to have really such an integral role in forming our future priests and our new priests? What has that experience been like for you?
Well, when I was first ordained, settling in as a priest wasn't that easy for me.
Mm.
And I always vowed to myself that I ever got into a place where I could have influence on young priests or seminarians, I would love to do that. So when seminarians come here, and I've probably had maybe 8 or 9 since I've been pastor,
Mm.
maybe even more, because a couple of them have come back more than once. And
Sure.
I love having them here. I love them seeing rectory life as it truly is.
Yeah.
That some days you're busy as all heck, and other days you have mass, and that's it. You have your paperwork as a pastor and all the rest of that stuff. But I always like to say, and people, some priests disagree with me, but I really believe that a priest can set his own schedule. Not that you become
Mm.
lazy or anything like that. I'm just saying that, if you have something, 2 or 3 things at night, you can kind of make your morning a little less. And
Mhm.
I want seminarians to know what they're getting into. We don't sit
Sure.
around and pray 24/7. We don't really have, Gregorian chant playing in the rectory. We're normal fellows. We eat,
Yeah.
we have fun, we go to the movies. The other day, I was going grocery shopping, and a lady from the parish said, "What are you doing here?" I wanted to say, "Well, what the heck do you think I'm doing here? I'm getting food. I'm getting, we have to
Yeah.
eat."
Yeah.
But I really do treat, or I try to anyway, treat the seminarians and the newly ordained priests that we get with kid gloves, because I want them so desperately to have a good experience here in this parish, which the people are great here, okay? But I think the people are
Sure.
great in every parish. But I want to give them as much experience as priesthood of what they can do without sacramental stuff, but I want them to
Yeah.
experience that in a good environment. I want them to feel safe here. I want them to feel that they
Mm.
can let off steam, that they can act like themselves. They can invite their friends over to have a cookout. All that stuff. I really want them to see how you can be, quote unquote, normal and still be a man of
Mhm.
God, a man of the cloth,
Yeah.
and someone who loves the Lord so very much. And I would think that most of the guys who have been here, hopefully, they would agree that they did have a good experience here. I also
Sure.
want them to know this, that um, if you ground yourself in a good experience, you can deal with anything in your priesthood.
Mm.
I think that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you for that. Thank you for sharing a little bit with us of your story and how God has worked in your life. And so to kind of wrap up, I've started doing these little quick fire questions, just two or three
Okay.
of them, and just the first thing that comes to your mind, which to these questions. So the first one is, who is your favorite saint other than Mary? Because that's kind of a given
St.
for
Jude,
us.
my
St. Jude.
mother's favorite
Excellent.
saint. She always prayed to him. It's probably why I'm a priest. And,
Yeah.
there's a lot of impossible things that need to be done. So that's
Yeah.
why. But I have another one that I really pray to right now, and that's Blessed Carlo Acutis, a teenage
Yep.
boy
Good.
that is died of leukemia at the age of 15, and he is semi incorruptible. I saw his resting place in Assisi. He is
Hmm.
a man who, though he died at a young age, had great faith and talked about the Eucharist and Eucharistic adoration and cataloged all the Eucharistic miracles throughout the world, throughout time. And Carlo is in a glass tomb in Assisi in a small church of Our Lady of the Angels. So I'm praying for him and to him so that he becomes a saint. And there's a special request that I need for someone in my family that
Hmm.
I'm really begging for his guidance and his help. So that was two.
Sure. No, but that's okay. And for anyone who's listening who has not heard of Blessed Carlo, I encourage you to look him up because one of the things that he's
Yeah,
recent. I mean, this is a blessed, a potential saint who played Xbox, and this catalog of Eucharistic miracles is online,
I think he died in
and it's something
2006.
you can go search.
I think he
Was
died
that?
in 2006.
Yeah, I mean, this is yeah. So this is very recent. This is yeah. So I encourage you, if you haven't heard of him, to go look him up. So the next question is, what is your favorite scripture passage or story from sacred scripture from the Bible?
Let me think. I think it's for God so loved the world that he gave us his only begotten son, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. I mean, I paraphrase there. And I also like the other one, that for God nothing is impossible.
Yeah, that's been I will it's funny, that's been a popular one so far with a couple of the guests that we've had on. So I guess there's some God's trying to tell us
Mhm.
something there. And then finally is just if you had kind of one devotion or spiritual practice of some kind that you would recommend to someone who's trying to discern what God's calling them to do in their life, what would you recommend?
I would without a doubt say the rosary. I don't miss it.
Yeah.
I say it every day, and sometimes I have to say it in parts because things
Mm-hmm.
come up. But we are Mary's, and she's going to guide us completely through that. So I go to the
Amen.
rosary.
Amen. Great. Well, thank you again, Father Corey, for your time, for the gift of your priesthood, and thank you, for sharing your wisdom and your story with us and with those who hopefully will listen to us and figure out what God's calling them to
Great. And
do.
if I could be to help of anybody, feel free to give me a buzz.
Sounds good. Great. Well, thank you again to our guest today, Father Corey Piccinino. Thank you for all of you who are listening to our podcast. We hope that you will continue to enjoy it. And especially as we enter into Holy Week, we pray that you all have a very blessed experience of celebrating the mysteries of our redemption, of the passion, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And may you have a wonderful and blessed Easter. May God bless you all. Take care.